Hi, welcome to Economy and Markets TV, where we have conversations with a purpose. I'm your host, Dave Okenquist, Senior Research Analyst here at Dent. The purpose today is to recap the news of the week, which means I bring on our Senior Editor and Co-founder of Dent Research, and of course the editor of Boom and Bust, Mr. Rodney Johnson. Rodney, good morning.
Morning, Dave.
Great to have you here as always. Rodney and I recap the news of the week every Friday. We try to keep things moving, and topics do 2 minutes or less. We go over that. We got a bell here, which keeps us going. So with that, let's just hit the big topic, which are the trade wars of 2018. The U.S. slapped a 10% tariff on $200 billion worth of goods from China. This is something, Rodney, we were talking about for a couple of weeks. Will it happen? Won't it happen? The president was hinting at it for a bit. Though some of the details under the hood, it's now 10%. By the end of the year, it's going to move up to 25% on that same $200 billion. And then a warning from the president, China, if you retaliate, we will find $267 billion in additional goods to mess with you on and to slap more tariffs and duties. Rodney, this thing is starting to get escalating, right? It's starting to get serious.
It is, and we have to go all the way back to when it started. Back at the beginning of the year, the markets were on fire after tax reform came in, and you were seeing the markets hit all-time highs. We were up, around 10% just there at the beginning of the year. And then once the tariff conversation started, the markets dropped like a rock. We just hit new all-time highs earlier this week. And so we're back to where we were at the highs, even though the tariffs actually were implemented. A small amount of 25, 30 billion was the first round in May. Trump talked about finding another 200 billion. We've been talking about it the last 2 weeks because he said he was putting the final touches on it to actually implement, which he did. And now, of course, the conversation is, well, if China retaliates again, by the way, because they did for the first round, then we'll go for another 267. That would bring the U.S. up to $500 billion worth of goods that we're imposing tariffs on, which is pretty close to the total of all Chinese goods, around 550 billion. Their total is 150, so they can't match dollar for dollar there. The interesting part is that it's gone on so long and it hasn't created as much of an effect yet. If it does continue, which I didn't expect, I thought that this would be a lot of posturing, a little bit of tariffs, and they would find a way for everybody to save face and kind of go about our way. But if it does continue, it will be inflation. It is a higher price for goods. That's what it's all about. You have to pay more, and that money is diverted, more or less, to industries here in the United States. And so you're going to see it show up probably first in PPI, producer price index, which is kind of inflation for manufacturers. And then you'll see it show up in consumer prices. And so we will see inflation from this if it continues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think China really thought that the United States was going to follow through. I think they thought it was all bluster. And then, wow, this is not.
Exactly. And look at what it did to their markets. I mean, we're hitting all-time highs. They're still off more than 20% from highs. So they're in bear market territory, not correction, bear market, as are a lot of emerging markets, whereas we're just moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. Something to keep an eye on. We really have more to say on here, but we want to keep the show moving. So let's move on to our next thing. It's housing. Housing starts are up 9.2% for the month, really driven by multifamilies, as you note, Rodney, up nearly 30%. So that's a big one. And then single families were actually down a bit for the year in terms of starts. Permits, as you know, Rodney, down 5.5%. That's a big one. That portends to less in the future. The other thing going on was existing home sales. Those were flat in August, down for the year about 1.5%. Yeah. And then and another detail in there, the median price down 1.7% to $264,000, but up nearly 5% for the year. So what did you get out of these two reports, Rodney, that gives you a hint of what's going on in the housing market?
Well, we're not increasing the stock of new houses, right? I mean, the general idea from housing starts, which ones you're building, is that you're kind of flat as to where you were last year, down just a touch. And so you have more people who want homes, being the millennials, huge generation, coming of age, forming families and wanting to buy a home. And yet there's not a lot out there. And it's this slowdown of the ability to buy. We've talked about it for a long time, being years, about the affordability. Your wages aren't allowing you to buy homes at these prices, but prices aren't really coming down. And so it's a matter of the market kind of informing itself, hey, if we're selling less at this price, what do? Do you lower the price to sell more, or do you keep the price up and just lower the number of sales? It looks like we're doing the second so far. Watching the median sale price of existing homes come down by 1.7%, it's noise. I don't worry too much about that. Not yet. If it trends lower 4, 5, 7% over the course of months, that's certainly something to pay attention to. But right now, what we're seeing is people say, look, if you're not willing to pay my price, that's okay. I'll wait a little while. I'll take fewer sales, but I'll keep the price up. I'm just not sure how long that can last.
Yeah, I remember a couple of months ago we were talking about the spring building season. We're past all that. This is going to be the slow part of the year. So you expect just flatness for a couple of months then?
Yeah, and the builders have done a great job. We've talked about them many, many times. But what they've done is basically shrink their activity to match what they see in sales.
Right.
And so they clearly made the decision, I'm not willing to load up the market with supply and dump prices. I'm much happier keeping prices up and shrinking supply. And so they have the ability to do it clearly as they have, brought in what they're willing to build. And they're looking around and saying, with the prices they are for labor and for land and for regulation and for materials, I just can't afford to go lower. So we'll wait for the buyers to come up to us.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it seems like sellers and buyers, they're just seeing who's going to crack first, right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks, Rodney. That's all we got for that topic. Our next one, we have legislation was introduced to Congress to extend the electric vehicle rebate by 10 years and would also limit the cap on which company it would apply to. This is a $7,500 federal rebate. It's limited to the company that goes 200 units produced in the what?
200,000. 200,000 units produced is where we are. The old regulation or the existing regulation is that...
I saw you shaking your head at me over there, Rodney.
Any supplier, any manufacturer, car manufacturer, when they sell a car, a buyer can apply and get a $7,500 tax rebate until that manufacturer has sold 200,000 units. Gotcha. And so the only person close to this now, of course, is Tesla. And Tesla is coming on up to its 200,000th unit. And so Tesla buyers would lose that subsidy in the first part of next year, part of it, like half. Yeah. And then it goes to zero by the second quarter. And so everybody's looking around and going, gee, Tesla, you sell a $100,000 car, even the Model 3, which is priced at $40,000. But of course, they don't make any of those. They only sell the ones that are higher priced with more features and stuff. If you're looking at that and saying, why am I giving a subsidy to somebody who's buying a $50,000 to $120,000 car? That's a good question. This legislation would say, hey, let's not hurt this market at all. Why are we going to basically harm Tesla? Let's just get rid of that cap for any manufacturer and just extend this rebate for 10 years. I'm not a fan. I don't know why we're subsidizing six-figure cars. It doesn't really make sense to me. And so we'll see what happens. I fully expect it to pass because who in this environment is going to come up and say, oh, no, we should actually, vote against some green energy initiative without really looking at the fact that what's happening is taxpayers of all stripes, from low income to high income, are subsidizing very expensive cars.
Yeah, I have a couple of little follow-ups there for you. One thing is now if we remove that cap, you're going to be getting foreign competition, so we'd be actually subsidizing foreign cars.
Right? BMWs, Mercedes, and Ferraris, and Jaguars, and everything else.
Yeah, but just looking, so I think you're in favor of just sort of eliminating this and letting the market sort it out. But looking back, was this a good policy in retrospect for at least a time to have it phased out, or was it not even a good idea to begin with? Because I think the idea was to foster that kind of those sales, right?
It clearly was. I'm at the other end, right? If you're going to do that, I believe what you're trying to do is introduce these types of vehicles across the spectrum. And so why would I give a tax rebate to somebody who's buying a six-figure car? Gotcha. Shouldn't I be looking at the type of person who's purchasing the car and say, hey, if you make $75,000 and you're trying to reach up and buy one of these vehicles, if it's aspirational and you want to drive a Tesla or you really believe in the electric vehicle movement, you're a lower income person in the scheme of things trying to buy this. Shouldn't I be trying to match my rebates based on income instead of just anybody who buys this vehicle?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, one little tidbit news that came out this week that I wanted to mention before we go. U.S. household net worth rose to nearly $107 trillion, which is a record. Yep. Financial from the last quarter, financial assets were up $1.7 trillion. Real estate assets up about $550 billion. And mortgage debt rose under that, $320 billion, which indicates rising homeowners' equity. Another thing I know a tip you noticed to me, Rodney, is this idea of inequality. When you get these financial and real estate assets going up, that means it's probably going to go into the hands of the wealthiest people.
That's exactly it. And we actually reached the point with this latest report where The top 0.1% of households by wealth, 0.1%, own as much wealth of the nation as the bottom 90% combined. And so clearly the numbers are skewed. This is the first time that's happened since the mid-1930s. But when we were at this point in the mid-1930s, inequality was actually getting better because the first time we reached this point was in the mid-1920s. If you go back and look at the chart, it was about 1925. As the great boom was happening in the 1920s, this inequality became, just a greater and greater gulf. And it reached its widest point in the early part of the Depression, as you saw, of course, farms and other lands being foreclosed. And people with assets were certainly much higher. But then it started to come back down, and it continued to decrease, meaning the inequality got smaller as we went through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even part of the 70s. So it's something to watch because this is something Harry Dent wrote about 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, when he was talking about the coming inequality after 2008, 2009, as you would see people with wealth be able to build their wealth. Nothing happens exactly like you think it's going to in terms of the details, but the trend is certainly there. And it's something that I've seen from 2 or 3 other writers who are saying, wait a second, as we go through this, you get this greater wealth inequality in rich nations. It's going to lead to populism. Kind of what we got.
Yeah. And same thing going on in Europe and really across the world. But yeah, so This is something it's real, whether or not you think it's a good thing or a bad thing. It does affect society and the mood of people if they see the rich getting richer. And then that bottom 90, as you say, just looking up and like, where's my deal, right? Where's doesn't work for me? Let's change this.
Well, particularly, and this is an interesting point. It's something I've written about a couple of other places. During a boom time, you're looking at it as the economy has grown, slowly, but grown for years and kind of picked up lately. People are going, well, I understand it's growing, but my wages are up only slightly over the past few years, and yet these guys are making a ton more. Something seems wrong here,
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's leave that one aside here. I know that's a contentious topic, so we'll just step away here. And that's actually all we had for the week, but we did want to bring that one up. Looking into next week, we've got the big thing is happening is the Fed meeting next Wednesday. They're expected to raise rates. I think really the only question here for you, Rodney, is is there a chance that they won't?
I don't think there's any chance they won't. I mean, the Federal Reserve doesn't say we're raising rates next time. They telegraph. And since their first rate hike back in December of 14, they've done everything but tell you what they're going to do at the next meeting. And so they've clearly told us they're raising next week. The big question in this one is going to be their forward statement. What does that look like? Most people, myself included, expect another rate hike in December. It's 2019, right? That's kind of a weird thing because we're looking at this. Interest rates are still fairly flat, even though the 10-year is about 3.08% right now.
Yeah.
You're looking at overnight rates at around 2 and moving up to 2.25 and maybe 2.25 to 2.5. That's awfully close to 3. And so it's a weird thing for the yield curve to get so flat with the economy kind of, moving along. And so it's all about what happens next year and what the Fed does to the yield curve.
Absolutely. We're going to detail all of that for you next week. A couple of the things we'll have our eyes on are new home sales, durable goods, and the U.S. home price index. So we'll see where prices are going. Keep marching upwards, most likely, right? We'll see. So we'll see what goes on next week. We'll talk to you all about that. And if you've got any feedback, suggestions, comments, send those to tv@economyandmarkets.com, and we'll be happy to respond to those and take that feedback into consideration. So with that, Rodney, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you all next week.